Okay, assalamu alaikum. Good morning or good afternoon, because I'm talking with on behalf of David and also me. Actually, we are welcoming Mr. David Gurteen to this workshop, and this workshop coming as a part of the workshop series webinars from Naseej Academy. And I think a lot of the people just attending with us now already attended before our webinars. We are welcoming again you, all the attendees. أهلا بكم جميعا. And welcoming Mr. David. Mr. David is a very well-known keynote speaker and writer and conversational facilitator. We had him in Naseej Academy in a workshop before about knowledge management, and he is a very easy one to find it. Just Google him, and he has this very wide blog having 100,000 of people. So we are honored to have him in this webinar. I will not talk too much about him, and I will give him the stage to starting. Again, I try to give this impression in the Arabic in a few minutes. برحب بكم جميعا وبنشكركم على حضوركم الويبينار دوت حول هي ترجمة اجتهادية من جانبي القيادة التحاورية which is أعتقد أنها مهمة جدا فيما يتعلق بالتخطيط الاستراتيجي للمكتبات، فيما يتعلق بالقيادات الخاصة بالمكتبات. هي نمط مش عايز أقول جديد، ولكن نمط مختلف من القيادة الموجودة في النظم الإدارية المختلفة في المكتبات. وديفيد جارتين من أكثر الناس اللي هيبقوا قادرين على أنهم يعرضوا الفكرة في خلال ساعة. ببساطة شديدة جدا الأسئلة أنا بفضل أنها طبعا وهو حريص على الجزئية دي تبقى في آخر 10 دقائق، وهو هيقدم نفسه دلوقتي ويبدأ مباشرة. وطبعا مرحب بكل الناس اللي تبدأ تخش أول بأول. الأسئلة بتبقى في الآخر في خلال الشات وهو بيرد عليها بالصوت، يعني بيقرا السؤال كده. اتمنى لكم ان شاء الله ويبينار موفق ومليء بالمعلومات، وان شاء الله نلتقيكم في فعاليات اخرى لنسيج اكاديمي. معنا زميل سعيد علي المنسق لاي اشكاليات ان شاء الله ما تكونش موجوده تقنيه، وفي نفس الوقت ان هو في الاخر هيختم الورشه. David, again I'm welcoming you. Thank you for being with us, and we accept, and all the attendees expect from you a lot of knowledge and to lead us in the long way about the conversational leadership. So the stage is yours now.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Abdallah. And welcome everybody. I can't see you. I know there are a number of you out there. I think what's interesting about this technology is I must be about 3,000 miles away from most of you. I'm based in Hampshire, maybe 1 hour out of London. But let's start off by telling you just a little bit more about myself, which will set some context for the remainder of this webinar. Right, so I've been working for myself now as an independent for, well, I think it's more than 25 years. I think it's more like 30 years. And to cut a very long story short, one of the things that I've really got involved in that time is the knowledge cafes that I've been running. They started in London in September 2002, and I hope that at least a few of you have attended them, because I've run quite a few of them in the Middle East. And if you're not familiar with the cafe, it's a very simple process for bringing people together to have a conversation around a topic of interest, fundamentally to make sense of it. It's not about making decisions or drawing up plans. It's about making sense of something, really in order to make better decisions. Now, in doing all of that, for this last 15 years or so, I've come to realize the phenomenal power of conversation at all sorts of levels, in all sorts of different ways. And this was never a plan. It just slowly, or has slowly, taken over my life and who I am and what I do. And what I've been doing now for the last 3 years or so is writing a book on conversational leadership. And when I say book, that's not a mistake. It's a book is a cross between a blog and an online book. And as you'll see, I'll give you the link to it. It's something that you can easily access, and it's the access to it is totally free. So I've been developing these ideas around conversational leadership. Actually, if the truth be known, probably for my lifetime. I've always been interested in people and how people interact and conversation, but it's kind of come to a head this last few years. And what I'm just starting to do now, as I get the material together, is to teach the concepts in webinars like this, and clearly also face to face. So that's a little bit about the background and the context to who I am and what I'm doing. Now, I hope some of you are familiar with the Greek historian Plutarch. This is one of my favorite quotations of his. The mind isn't a vessel to be filled, it's a fire to be kindled. Now, given the scope and the breadth of conversational leadership, I'm only going to scratch the surface of it this afternoon. I'm more intent on kindling a spark in you all, if you will, to take an interest in conversational leadership rather than trying to fill your minds with a lot of stuff. So I'm going to be talking at quite a high level, and I want to get across fundamentally that the purpose of conversational leadership, because I think it's an important one. So let's step on. Now, this is the table of contents for the book, and I'm just sharing this with you so that you can get some idea of the scope. A big part of it, as you can see in the center there, is the Knowledge Cafe. What I've been trying to do is thoroughly document the Knowledge Cafe, not just the principles and the process, but applications and stories as to how people have taken it and applied it, because it's the cafe that's pretty much driven all my thinking around around conversational leadership. So, again, everything I talk about is in this book. So anything I mention that you want to know more about, go to the book, conversational-leadership.net, and you will find much more material. Okay, so now the interesting thing is I have been working on the book and thinking about conversation for quite some time, and the one question I kept asking myself, that I kept coming back to, is what is the problem? What is the problem I'm trying to solve here? Am I trying to solve a problem? What's this really about? Why do I think that my thinking on conversational leadership is so important? What's it really in response to? And it's this I want to take you through, because I think this is the heart of understanding what it's about in many ways. I think most of you would tend to agree that the world is a bit of a mess. You might think it's a terrible mess. It's not just, say, at a political level, it's at all levels, organizational levels, personal, family, global. Depression, divorce, disruption, polarization, global warming. I don't need to list the problems of the world. I'm sure you can readily add to that list. Well, what's interesting is there's a lot of research that shows that the world is a much better place than it ever was in the past. There are less wars, there's less poverty, there's less illness. But I can't help but feel that the sorts of problems that we're facing today are more existential. Global warming, if the predictions are true, and I'm pretty sure they are, is going to have a mammoth impact on the world and cause a phenomenal amount of disruption and distress and chaos. So the world's a mess, whatever way you want to look at it. small or large, it's a mess. Okay? Now, at the same time, I can look back over my adult life. Now, I can look back now over 50 years, and maybe more like 60 if the truth be known. And I've seen a mammoth change in the world. It's the fact now that today, compared to 50 years ago, our world is hyperconnected. You know, when I was a child growing up in England, there was no, well, we didn't have a TV. We didn't have a phone. You know, just think about that. We didn't have a car. The window, our window on the world was a very small one. Books, well, we had one or two books, but basically you borrowed books from the library. You are well aware today that most people, they're less likely to buy books, they're less likely to borrow books, they're more likely to buy them. And so what's happened in this last 50 years is the world has become highly connected. And it's not just the internet and the World Wide Web and the likes of Facebook and YouTube and what have you. The global financial system is a phenomenally complex ecosystem, if you will. And it's not just the monetary system, our supply chains, distribution channels, electricity, water, gas, international transport. This all connects us together in very convoluted, detailed sort of ways. And as the digital economy starts to emerge and the Internet of Things, we're going to see even greater connectivity. Now, there's a point to all of this, and that is connectivity naturally leads to more complexity. You may have heard of the term VUCA, and people referring to the world as a complex VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatile, unpredictable, uncertain, confusing, complex, and ambiguous world. And the key thing to understand here is that complex is not the same as complicated. A car is complicated. A jet airliner is complicated. But the global economy is complex. You can take a car to pieces, put it back together again. You cannot do the same with an ecosystem, with an economy. And what it means is that in a complex world, the world is inherently unpredictable. You cannot predict what is going to happen in a complex world. Even if you had all the computing power you could possibly want and all the information that you wanted, you still would not be able to predict it. This is at the heart of what it means to be complex. And in addition, it's not just that you can't predict it, it's the fact that anything that you do, any action you take is always, but always going to have unintended or unforeseen consequences. So as you can see, it makes it difficult to operate in a complex world. And our world is becoming more and more complex. Okay, hope this is making some sense. Now, just to add to that complexity, as I'm sure most of you are aware, as human beings, we are complex. It's not just our bodies and our brains are complex. Our bodies consist of billions of cells, our brains, I think, trillions of neurons. But the way we interact with each other is complex. Just think of all our emotions and biases and the arguments and the fights and everything that we get into. It's phenomenally complex. Dave Snowden, who I'll talk about I think a little bit later, I hope some of you are familiar with, he talks about it, he calls it Anthro-complexity, effectively the complexity of being human. And then just to add even more to this complexity, as humans, we don't only interact with each other, we interact with our technical systems. And so we get so-called socio-technical systems, which just adds yet another layer of complexity. So I'm just like underlining this complex world that we live in. And I think a lot of us certainly myself for a long time, just took it for granted. At times I think we're like the proverbial frog in boiling water. You know, things change around us so slowly that we don't realize that change has taken place. Now, the outcome of all of this is pretty much that our old ways of thinking and working are either not working well or they're failing. You know, the old mindset, if you will, was one of predictability, was one of command and control. You know, we saw the world as a car, as a simple sort of system, one that you could control. You know, a world where Newton's laws of physics, you know, applied. And yes, in some areas they still do, but increasingly as things become more and more complex, things become inherently unpredictable, and we simply cannot plan and control things as it was. In fact, it's crazy to do that, and I think it's the root cause of so many of our problems. And what I say, you know, to kind of underline all of this, we don't understand the world because the world has changed so much. In fact, we've probably never really truly understood the world. But probably worse still, we don't understand ourselves. We don't understand our biases. We don't understand our limitations. We still don't really understand what it means to be human. We're getting a little bit better at it these days. There's a lot of interesting neuroscientific research going on into the brain that's demonstrating, I guess, just what emotional creatures we are. We tend to think of ourselves as very rational creatures. And hey, we've made some huge progress in many, many ways. But if you stop and reflect and if we look at each other, we realize that we're not rational creatures at all. We're very emotional creatures. And we need to understand that better if we're going to work better together. So the outcome of all of this, at least to my mind, is the mess that we're in. It's this hyperconnectivity that's led to complexity, and the fact really that we haven't kept up with our understanding of it all that is causing us so many problems. We've only got to look around the world, as I said earlier, and look at what's going on in America, look at what's going on in this country with Brexit, look at what's going on in Europe, I mean, damn it, look what's going on in the Middle East. We have got to get much better at understanding the world, understanding ourselves, and maybe taking a different approach to the way that we work. Right. So that's sort of like a little introduction, a little. It's the rationale behind what this is all about for me. So I said the response is conversational leadership. One of the things in a complex world to remember is there are never any solutions to that. As soon as you touch anything in the complex world, it changes. And so you can maybe try to fix a problem, you will simply create more problems, or you move the problems around. You can only ever respond to problems and move things in a direction. You can never fix it. If your tap is leaking, you can fix your tap. If the global economy is not working, that's a whole different ballgame. So I talk about response. So I'm not saying conversational leadership is the only response. I think personally it's a big part of the response to the problems that we face in the world. Now this is a really quite a simple definition. I'm one that likes definitions, just something that helps me get my head around things. This definition has changed 3 or 4 times since I started writing. It doesn't explain to you in detail as to what conversational leadership is about, but it's a good high-level definition. So I say it's about recognizing the extraordinary but underutilized power of face-to-face conversation, because it's face-to-face conversation I'm fundamentally talking about. And it's about adopting a more conversational approach to the way in which we live and the way in which we work together. So it's recognizing the power of conversation, fundamentally. Conversation is at the heart of all of this, but it's not the totality of it. So why conversation? There was a book that some of you may have read. It's a few years old now. I think it was published in 1999. It's a few years old. Called the Clue Train Manifesto. And it was actually predicting the impact of the social web. And in it, one of the authors, a gentleman called David Feinberger, he said something, I can't remember his exact words. He said that knowledge management shouldn't be about knowing more. It shouldn't be about stuffing more information into people's heads. What he said is that knowledge management should be about helping us to understand things better, You kind of realize the connection now between what I've just been saying. And then he said, how as human beings have we always understood? How have we always made sense of the world? We've made sense of the world partly through observation and reflection, but given our our blinkers at times, the way we've really made sense is through the conversations that we have. And he's talking about the conversations that go back to prehistory, the conversations we had around the campfire. This is how we make sense of things. We make sense of things through conversation. So to me, this is why conversation is at the heart of responding to the mess that we're in. Okay. And then leadership. Why leadership? Well, the first thing, there's a couple of points here that kind of twisted together. The first point is that if we want to make better sense of the world, and given the cognitive biases that we have as human beings, because as I said earlier, we're not particularly rational, we need more than one person to be thinking about the problems and the issues. We need to bring, if you like, a group of people together to have a conversation around a challenge or a problem or an issue, to make sense of it, to understand it. And we can't rely on sort of one heroic leader to lead us to victory, if you will. So first of all, we need more people involved in the conversation. But secondly, I've got a slightly different definition of leadership than maybe in common use. As far as I'm concerned, anybody who has influence is potentially a leader. And if you think about it, all of us has influence to one degree or another. It means, okay, some of us have got much more limited influence than others. If you're in a position of authoritative power, you've maybe got a lot of influence. If you're a politician or the CEO of a large organization, you have got a lot of influence. But everybody in an organizational setting, even a new graduate, has got influence if they choose to use it. And I think, again, just given the complexity of the world, we can't rely on just one or two leaders to lead us out of the mess that we're in. We need to bring more people into engagement with the world, to make better sense of it, and to lead in their own individual ways. I hope that's making sense. I always found that just a little bit difficult to explain, but this is why I call it conversational leadership. The key thing here is that it's not just about being good at holding conversations. More than anything else, it's about leadership, because Stephen Covey, I think Stephen Covey's second habit, if you're familiar with his work, the 7 habits of highly effective people. His first habit is be proactive. His second habit is begin with the end in mind. So if we're going to try to get better at conversation, the question is, why do we want to do that? Why is that important? And that's what I'm trying to get across to you this afternoon. Okay. Right. So why conversation? Why leadership? Right. Let's take a look this isn't a deep dive. This is just a rather shallow dive into conversational leadership. And what I've boiled out of my thinking is five principles. Until recently, I had 7, but that just seemed a few too many. And again, if you want to learn more, you will find all this in my book. I've listed the table of contents here. You can see the 5 principles of take responsibility, become a leader in the sense I just described, converse, talk more. This is the heart of conversational leadership. Embrace complexity thinking, because I think, as I hope I've already made the case, if we want to solve the problems of the world, we have got to understand the complexity of the world. And although I've got that as principle number 4, I suspect I should make it principle number 1, because it is the thing that's driving it. And last, that I'll say a little bit about, and I think it's kind of like a more ultimate goal of all of this, is to build community. I think that we need to care a lot more about each other if we're going to create a better world. So that's very briefly, and it is very brief. I'm just going to go through these really quite quickly just to give you a flavor. Go to my book to learn more. So we need to take ownership and responsibility for change. I think we've kind of been brought up in a world where we're reliant on other people. We're reliant on our parents, we're reliant on our boss, we're reliant on the politician for the change that we would like to see in the world. And just given the enormity of the problems we face, I think more of us need to take responsibility and start to do something ourselves. The good thing about this is that there's no permission needed. There's really no resources needed either. It's something that each and every one of us can do to one degree or another, today. Become a leader. I mean, this is what I've just been really talking about. If you have influence, if you have a passion, you are a potential leader. This is just a matter of deciding that you want to lead in some way. This is just a little. Again, it's the same. It's the same with take responsibility. There's a little switch in your head. I'm going to take responsibility. This is the second switch in your head. I want to lead in some way and make a difference in the world. They're both mindsets. There's nothing that you need to learn to make these 2 decisions. Okay. Converse, and as I say, this is at the heart of it all. I'm going to come back and say a little bit more about this in a moment. I think that if we're going to work better together, we need to talk more, and I'm talking fundamentally about face-to-face, and we need to improve our conversational skills and the way that we talk with each other. And I've just listed a few of the things that we need to do here. We need to listen better. We need to speak up when we don't agree with something. We need more dialogue, i.e. making sense of the world, and debate, i.e. proving that someone's right or wrong. And there's a whole slew of conversational methods, such as after-action reviews and the knowledge cafe and peer assists, that can help us improve our conversations. I didn't say too much about complexity, other than we need to understand it, and in particular its implications on how to live in a complex world. And so I've already talked about this in the introduction. And last but not least, this concept of building community. Again, I don't want to say too much about this right now, but let me just say this. There's a gentleman. Now, what is his name? His name is Henry Mintzberg. He's a management consultant. He's in his 70s now. He's a professor at, I think, Toronto University of Toronto. And actually, he's well known for his work on strategy. But one of the things he says, and it's had a huge influence on me, he said that organizations are not a collection of human resources or human capital. That organizations are a community, a living community of human beings. So, you know, this is one of the things that we tend to do. We tend to see ourselves maybe at times as professionals and leave our humanity at home and become very different creatures when we're working in an organizational setting. And this is something that I think needs to change. And as I said earlier, I think fundamentally it's about caring more for each other. Okay? Right, let's see where we are. Okay, so what I want to do now is just say a few words. So I've tried to give you the rationale behind conversational leadership. I've tried to talk a little bit about the principles and the things that underpin it. And I say there's a lot more in my book. I just want to say a few words now about getting started if this is of interest to you. And the key thing here, I think, is maybe the point I've already made. It's a personal commitment. It's not just for senior managers or executives. Anybody can decide to lead conversationally. And the very last thing it is some sort of organizational development or human resources or change initiative. It's not something that the organization does to you. It's something that you do. It's something that you become. It's a way you behave. The phenomenal thing about it, it doesn't require any permission. And it's not just about organization life. It's about family. It's about community. It's about society. It's a way of living in the world, if you will. So if you like the idea, one of the first things to do is to learn. Now, the interesting thing about my book, and it's one of the reasons I did it as a website rather than a conventional book, is that it's multimedia. I can embed high resolution photographs in it of my cafes to demonstrate things. I can embed videos of myself giving talks, but more importantly, I can embed videos of people like Henry Mintzberg talking about community. So, and it's not, the book is not just about me. I'm pulling in resources and ideas and thoughts and concepts and blog posts and articles from many, many other people. So in part of my book, there's an internal library. There's a list of books that would make interesting reading. There's a list of videos that make interesting viewing. So again, the book is a learning resource. I've created a forum on LinkedIn, Conversational Leaders Forum, for people who want to come along and discuss what conversational leadership is all about. And also for those of you who still use a newsreader, feed reader like myself, I've got a list of people, again, the key people that have influenced me over the years and still do, as part of the book. And it's possible to go there and subscribe to the RSS feeds and keep up to date with their thinking. So, that's fundamentally the first step, clearly, is to learn more about what I have to say. The second thing is then just to start to do stuff. I mean, it hasn't got to be in any major way. It's about maybe improving your conversational habits and getting to better understand some of the conversational methods that are available. And you will find, I say, a vast amount of material in my book. And for me, the most powerful of all the methods is the Knowledge Cafe. Now, I'm not here to sell the Knowledge Cafe, but again, take a look if you're not familiar with it. Right, now I wanted to say just a little bit about conversational habits, and I've got many of them listed, but I just want to talk about two and just give you a little bit of insight into the sorts of things, maybe new ways of thinking that I'm trying to explore, if you will. And the first two is converse more and to listen more. So one of the first things to do is to start talking and interacting with other people more than we do. We spend far too long communicating via email, communicating via messaging, having lunches on our own, when we could be out actually interacting face-to-face, talking with other people and building relationships. Again, this is incredibly simple. There's no permission required to do it. You can just start to do it. But the interesting point here is that it's not even too important what you talk about. Now, that might seem a very, very strange thing to say, but it's based on some research done by this gentleman. His name is Alex Pentland. I think he's known as Sandy Pentland. He's the director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Human Dynamics Lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I won't go into his into the detail, but he's created some little gadgets, shall we call them, called sociometric badges. So he can wire people up in an organization. He does this as an experiment. This isn't something that's done on an everyday basis to control people. And through those badges, he can gather data on how people, where and how and in what way people are interacting with each other within the organization. And the key finding of his research is this. He says that the most important predictor of success in a group, could be an organization, a team, is the amount of social interaction. And then this is the key piece. Regardless of what is talked about, the more social a group, the more socially people interact with each other, the more successful that group is. And I think that's sort of really quite a phenomenal outcome. And it's a good example of some of the research that's going on in the world today, that's getting us to maybe recognize a little bit more clearly about human interaction. So that's about talking more. Nancy Klein wrote a book. She's a British woman, wrote a book, again, some years ago, maybe 20 years ago, called Time to Think. And in the book, she says that listening is not a passive act, but it's a very powerful action. And again, I don't think by and large we fully appreciate that. You tend to think of listening as being maybe at times rather boring. And then I've got a little video of her embedded in my book somewhere, where she says this, and this is the insight. This is I think really exciting. I think we kind of know it, but it takes someone to say it. She says that if I can be profoundly interested in what you think and what you will think next and where you will go with your thinking, if I just show interest in that, you will generate ideas and insights and ways forward that you wouldn't do without my listening, without that attention. And so someone's talking with somebody, they're trying to explain an idea to you. What she's saying is, don't try to improve on the idea, don't try to criticize the idea, don't try to share with them one of your ideas. Listen intently to what they're saying. Say very, very little. Aha, yes, got you, that's interesting. Do that genuinely. This is not a technique. Show a genuine interest in what the person has to say. Listen intently. And you will help them be more creative. And if you can build colleagues, find colleagues and friends who will do the same for you, then you're creating a very powerful, very creative sort of relationship. So these are the sorts of things that interest me. These are the sorts of things that I think make the whole concept of conversation leadership really quite powerful. So drawing to a close here now, here's a question I would like to leave you with. What conversation are you or your organization not having that you should be having, and how do you initiate it? So think of your organization. Actually, it needn't be your organization. It could be a social community or family setting. What are the things that are not being talked about? The things that are really, really important that are simply not being talked about. People are looking the other way. People are maybe afraid even of raising as an issue. Because it's not always easy to raise issues and start conversations about things that people are afraid of. But so you've probably got to think about it and say, am I the right person? Is this the right time? What's the best way, maybe politically, to start this conversation? But think about it. Think hard about it. And if you do one thing from this webinar, figure out the conversation that you should be having, and figure out if you're brave enough to initiate it. Okay. So let's just I think just drawing to a close here, and then I'll take some questions. Okay, so here's the book. Go take a look for anything I've said. Anybody I've mentioned, the principles, etc. They are all there on the book. The book is work in progress. A lot of it is work in progress. A lot of it needs a lot of cleaning up, but there's a lot of material there that I think you can make good sense of. Right, coming to the end. I'm just going to leave you with this quotation from a gentleman called Cory Doctorow. And I know most of you are librarians, so you may have a bit of a problem with this. When I say conversation is king, books are just something to talk about. I say books, content. It seems to be the modern word. Conversation is king. Content is just something to talk about. And this strikes the heart of what I've been talking. It's all very well having books. I mean, I say most of you librarians, so you understand that. Books are powerful. Books have revolutionized the world, maybe more than the internet ever has. But the most important thing is to understand the content in there. And that understanding, okay, it comes from reading, it comes from reflection, maybe on your own, but it also comes through the conversations that you have with other people, because people see things differently. They take different things away from the content. Okay, so drawing to a close. Yeah, let's take some questions if there are any. I'm sure there will be. Okay. Can anybody hear me? It's up to Tariq. I'm just, okay. Okay, someone has just made the point that thanks for the webinar, looking forward to hearing more. Dr. Tariq, no, I can't hear you. But I can't hear anybody. Why can't I hear anybody? Okay, let's take one question here. It says, what if we have a boss who doesn't like to have a conversation and discuss things? What should we do in that case? It's interesting because most people do enjoy conversations and discussing things, and One of the books that's hugely influenced me over the years, that was written in the 1930s, Dale Carnegie, How to Make Friends and Influence People. It's a classic book, and a lot of that there. He's saying, you know, you need to find, if you want to make friends, if you want to influence people, you've got to find the things that those people are interested in. Maybe not just interested in, but passionate about. So I suspect with your boss, if you could find the right topics, if you could find the things that he was passionate about, he would be more than happy to have a conversation. There's another American consultant called Peter Block, and he says, he basically says you need to build a relationship before you can discuss content. So if you're going into your boss to say, have a conversation around a business issue, you know, an organizational issue, that may be difficult until you've built a more personal relationship with him, in which case it'll be a lot easier. But at the same time, you're right, there are a lot of people who may be not so good at talking about things, and so it can be difficult. I'd agree. So let's stop there. There's a few more questions coming up now. Let's take the next one here. How can we manage tensions in this complex world, which is results oriented and time constrained, especially when we are so connected? The time constraint is one that comes up all the time. And it reminds me of the old story of somebody cutting down a tree with a very blunt saw, and somebody says, look, you know, why don't you take the time, take 20 minutes out to sharpen the saw, and then you make much better progress. And they say, no, I don't have time to sharpen the saw, I'm too busy cutting down this tree. And I think that's kind of part of it in terms of the time constraints. You've got to look and say, you know, what's the priority here? What's most important? What's most effective? And the other interesting thing I think about time is that we always make time for the things that we are passionate about, the things that we want to do, and we tend to push things that we don't think are important to the bottom of the list. So recognizing the importance of conversation is part of this. You know, pushing it higher up your priority stack is a big part of it. But you're right. I mean, it's not particularly easy in a fast-paced, results-oriented world to get things done. And that's part of the problem, and that's one of the things we need to figure out how better to do that. Okay, so what other questions have we got here? We need the material that was shown to be sent. I'll be giving that to Naseej, so they can send that out to you. That's not a problem. So what have we got here? Initiating a conversation about things that never have been talked about is considered as conversational leadership. Yes, it's certainly part of it, but it's recognizing, I think, a lot of the time, the strategic things that need to be talked about, the things that are going to make a difference. That's what this is. That's what this is primarily about. Okay, I'm just picking up questions here in different places. Okay, Dana, you say, please talk about conversing in a bilingual environment. I know it's a very big topic, but please mention the main points. I'm not too sure quite what you're getting at with the question. My wife is Indonesian, I think, as you know, Dana, and so I'm very familiar with the problems of communicating in a bilingual environment, and the misunderstandings that can very easily take place. I'm just trying to think out loud here. This isn't a problem just with the bilingual environment. Is that when we're having a conversation with another person, whether their native language is different, or whether they come from a different culture, or maybe if they come from up the road and went to the same school as you, people are very, very different, and it's very, very easy to miscommunicate, to misunderstand them in all sorts of ways. So I suspect one of the key things always to keep in mind is give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Assume that people are acting in good faith. Even when people say things that are, to your mind, I don't know, you might think they're racist, you might think, you don't like their politics or what have you. Stop and take the time to really understand them. When someone says something that shocks you, ask them to repeat it back to them. Just make sure that it always seems to me, if you're going to have a fight or an argument or something with somebody, that's all well and good. It's better if you didn't, but it's all well and good as long as it's not based on a misunderstanding. So I think it's about working very hard to understand each other. And I'm sure there are other points there that on reflection I could add to that. Okay, lots of questions popping up here. How do we convince my managers that he was convinced only of his ideas? Yeah, and another good one. One of the tools that clearly I'm very wedded to is the Knowledge Cafe, is the ability to bring a small group of people together to have a conversation, an open conversation. A Knowledge Cafe isn't about debate, it's about dialogue, it's about better understanding things, it's about learning. As much as anything, it's about learning about yourself. And there are a lot of people, convinced that they know the answers, they know everything, and it's always going to be difficult to convince them otherwise. But if you go up to them one-on-one and turn that into an argument, they're probably going to dig their heels in and be more adamant that their way of seeing things or their idea is the best idea. But if you can say through things like knowledge cafes, expose them to other people's thinking, then there's a chance that they may just see things differently, and they may just accept other people's ideas. They'll probably take them on as their own, and you'll suddenly find that a week later they're talking about an idea that they claim to be their own, but it was something that maybe they picked up in conversation. So how can everyone lead or to be led? When I think about what I'm talking about with conversational leadership and leaders and followers, there are certain people that I feel, let's just explain it from my perspective. There are certain people I feel who are leaders. They lead me. I mean, they're usually people who have got ideas. They're usually people who've got ways of looking at the world, I mentioned David Weinberg, I mentioned Peter Block, I've mentioned a few other people, I mentioned Henry Mintzberg. To me, these are leaders. You might call them thought leaders or idea leaders. And in some sense, I follow them. I follow these people. I follow their blog posts. I search out videos and I buy their books. So I'm following them. But also, I've got my own followers. The 256th issue of my knowledge letter went out only yesterday. That's been going out for 20 years to about 23,000 people. So I've got people who read my stuff. They're my followers. And so you can have both. And in an organization, you might have, again, the CEO might be leading the strategy, but you might be leading your team. There's room for both leaders and followers. I'm not too sure if that answers the question, but that's my thinking on leadership and followers. What else do we have? Sorry for my laughter. How can I deal with a selfish boss that doesn't want anyone to share in work? I know somebody who works for a big international bank, and everybody, it's not just the bosses, it comes from the bosses. The bosses are very command and control. They don't want people to share. People live in fear of the senior managers. People compete with each other, and it comes from the very top of the bank. It's very deep in the culture. And to be honest with you, I am not so sure that there's any particular way of changing people who are of that opinion and who are embedded in a culture that supports that opinion. I think all you can do in those situations is not become like them, is to, I guess in Gandhi's words, be the change that you wish to see. I don't think there's a simple answer to that. Okay, what else do we have here? What is the difference between a team leader and a team manager? Now that's interesting. To me, a manager is somebody who makes the plans, somebody who decides the order of things, somebody who hires the team, somebody who does the performance reviews. They manage stuff. And typically in the team, there will be one team manager. It will be their responsibility. They will be accountable for the outcome of that team. But there could certainly be more than one leader within the team, just depending on the size of the team and what the team is about. If it was a software team, somebody could be the lead programmer. Somebody could effectively be the lead designer rather than the manager. Somebody could be taking the lead on the user interface. Somebody could be taking the lead on the marketability. Everybody in some way. I guess I'm seeing this word lead in a somewhat different light. It's not so much about leading people, though it's part of that. It's much more about thought leadership in some ways than physical command and control type leadership. So again, I hope that makes sense. What else do we have here? Okay, let's take a look at this. The prophet is not own in his city. I'm just trying to remember that. Yeah, the prophet is not known in his city. Tell us about this sentence. What kind of advice that you would like to send it to those staff who did not get the chance to be leader in the organization? This reminds me of somebody who told me recently a story where they had developed a proposal to do something within their organization. And they knew that if they proposed it, it wouldn't be accepted. So they hired a consultant. I'm not too sure the detail of this, but they hired a consultant and to do the work, except they told the consultant, we don't want you to do the work. I want you to pretend this work of mine, work of your own, and I want you to propose it to my superiors. They needed to do that because clearly the bosses were going to accept the word of somebody outside the organization rather than somebody inside the organization. One of the things I'm starting to work on and think about in the context of conversational leadership is something that's often referred to as, and I'm going to forget the word, agency. There was a guy called Michael Schrage, I think he's still around, he's a collaboration consultant, and some years ago he said, knowledge management is a bullshit issue because I can give people perfect information, knowledge, but they don't have the power to do anything with it. And that could be for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is simply that you can't convince your boss because your boss won't listen. And so a big part of this is figuring out how the politics, if you like, and the psychology of getting somebody to listen. This has come up in a few points, a few times here, hasn't it? How do you get somebody to listen who really is inclined not to listen? And it's about building relationships. It's about building relationships not just with the person in mind, but people around them. People. If your boss or the person you're trying to influence is closer to other people, and you can get close to them and influence them and get them to maybe do your influencing for you, you stand a chance of getting things done. If you kind of try to hit the wall head on, then it's going to be a lot harder, if not impossible. Now, I don't know how we're doing, Saeed, whether we can bring to a close here. I know there are a few more questions here that I haven't answered, but
I think we haven't any questions today.
I'm sorry,
Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, Mr. David, for your outstanding presentation.
Okay.
And thank you for our great attendees for your great participation. And we hope you join us, our upcoming webinar, inshallah. Thank you again.
Can I just say one thing? I know there's a few questions here I haven't answered. And if anybody wants to, if you let them have my email address, although I think it's
okay.
If anybody wants to email me or call me or talk to me about anything to do with this, then you're very, very welcome.
Okay, Mr. David. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hey, remember, think about the conversations that you need to have, especially the strategic ones, the important ones.
Sure, Mr. David.
That's the essence of all of this. Okay. Thank you very, very much to everybody. Thank you.